The creek moved the wrong direction. That was the whole problem. Cutter's Run had been bending northwest through Caldwell County, Kentucky, since before the Civil War. It ran parallel to the far edge of Raymond Pruitt's land for 3/4 of a mile, then angled away toward the Dawson property and disappeared into a gulch of limestone and cedar. The water was right there, had always been right there, and Raymond's fields, 61 acres of flat bottomland soil that could have grown anything, sat dry and cracked from June through September every year he farmed them. Raymond Pruitt was 48 years old in the spring of 1967, had been working that same land since his father handed it to him in 1952. Back then, the price of dark-fired tobacco could still carry a family through winter without borrowing. By 1967, those prices had softened. He had 61 acres. One John Deere 3010 with a bad hydraulic seal. A 1961 Ford F-100 with 94,000 miles on it. A well that produced 3 gallons a minute on a dry day. Not enough for corn, barely enough for the kitchen and the livestock, and the 2 acres of burley he kept out of habit. The fields smelled of dust in summer. Fine gray dust that came off the topsoil in the afternoon wind and coated the truck windshield and the inside of his nose by evening. He had watched his father fight the same problem for 30 years and never solve it. His father's solution had been tobacco, small acreage, drought-tolerant, valuable enough per pound to compensate. By 1967, that math had changed, and Raymond knew it. He'd known it for 3 years. He had tried conventional irrigation twice. The first attempt was a 1.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton pump, mounted on a wooden skid, drawing from a concrete cistern he'd poured himself in 1959. The cistern held 4,000 gallons. In a dry July, 61 acres burned through that in 4 days. He'd refill it from the well. The well needed 9 days to recover to useful pressure. He'd burn through the cistern again in 4. There was no rhythm to it that worked, no arithmetic that solved it. The second attempt was a hired water truck. The summer of 1966 cost Raymond $1,400 in emergency water trucking, a man from Eddyville with a 2,000-gallon tank making 11 runs from the county reservoir at $2 a gallon. It kept the corn alive past August, but not past September. He brought in 62 bushels per acre that year. The Caldwell County average was 91. The extension office in Princeton had sent a man out in the summer of 19. Young man. Fresh from the University of Kentucky agricultural program, driving a green state pickup. He walked the property for 2 hours with a measuring wheel and a clipboard, drank a glass of iced tea on the porch, and told Raymond that his topography was unsuitable for gravity-fed irrigation, said the elevation differential between Cutter's Run and the field's center line was 7 feet in the wrong direction. The creek sat lower than the fields by 7 feet at the nearest approach point. You could not move water uphill without a pump, and a pump big enough to service 61 acres would cost more to run than the corn would bring in at market. Raymond thanked him. The man left his card on the porch railing. It blew off before he reached the end of the lane. He started looking at the creek differently that fall. Not the nearest crossing. The whole thing. In October of 1966, after the failed season and the $1,400 trucking bill, Raymond walked the full 3/4 mile of Cutter's Run that bordered his property. He wore rubber boots and carried a 4-foot carpenter's level and a 100-foot measuring tape his father had bought from the hardware store in 1941. The temperature was in the low 40s. The water was cold enough to make his ankles ache through the rubber. He waded where he had to and walked the bank where he could. He measured the height of the creek bank above the water's surface every 50 feet, made marks with a grease pencil in a spiral-bound notebook. The work took 3 afternoons. What he found was this: at the northeast corner of his property, where nobody went because the cedar trees and blackberry brambles made it nearly impassable, Cutter's Run dropped over a small limestone shelf. A 4-foot drop and 30 feet of stream length. Below that shelf the creek ran low, but above the shelf, at the extreme northeast corner of Raymond's land, the creek bank sat only 5 feet below the field edge. Not 7. 5. And following the contour of the hillside that curved behind the property, that 5-foot difference shrank over 400 yards. 3 feet. Then 2. Then, at one specific point that Raymond measured 3 times before he wrote it down, the creek bank and the field edge were within 8 inches of each other in elevation. 8 inches. 40 feet of horizontal distance between the water and the corner of the northernmost field. Raymond sat on a limestone rock in the cold current of Cutter's Run in October of 1966 and looked at this for a long time. The extension agent had measured from the nearest point. The nearest point was the worst point. The agent had made the measurement, concluded it was impossible, and left. That was understandable. That was what a quick survey produced. Raymond had spent 3 afternoons getting wet in cold water and found the one place on 3/4 of a mile of creek where the numbers told a different story. He went home and drew a map on a flattened brown paper bag. The concept was not complicated. If the creek could be redirected at the northeast corner, it would flow by gravity through a cut channel along the upper field boundary, running southeast and dropping steadily as it went, following the natural slope of the land toward the field center. A channel 800 yards long would reach the middle of the property. A secondary branch could be cut later to service the south fields. The water would move. No pump. No fuel cost. No dependency on a well that couldn't keep up. The cut at the diversion point would be 40 feet long. The channel itself, 800 yards. 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep. Raymond calculated the cubic footage on the paper bag with a pencil stub, sitting at the kitchen table after supper. He was not an engineer. He had finished the 8th grade in 1931 and had taught himself arithmetic from farm ledgers and tax forms. He worked the calculation twice and got the same number both times. Approximately 4,400 cubic feet of soil to be moved. At a tractor blade's average rate of progress on that type of soil, he estimated based on past grading experience, he was looking at 18 to 22 working days. He had a scoop blade on the 3010. 7-foot blade, hydraulic angled, though the seal on the line had been seeping since 1964. He would need culvert pipe for 2 crossings where fence lines met the channel path. He would need to construct a diversion headwall at the creek. He needed to accomplish all of this before the spring planting window closed in late April. He had from mid-March. He ordered 2 24-inch corrugated steel culverts, each 20 feet long, from a supplier in Paducah. Cost $67 for both. He borrowed a Tennessee Valley Authority drainage manual from the county library in Marion and read it through January and February. The manual was 214 pages. The relevant sections he read 3 times. He showed the brown paper bag drawing to his neighbor Cecil Hargrove in late February. Cecil farmed 44 acres across Cutter's Run and had been Raymond's neighbor for 22 years. Cecil looked at the drawing for a minute and a half. Said the channel would silt up in one season. Said you couldn't divert a creek with a farm tractor, and said the state might have something to say about diverting a waterway without permits. Said Raymond was going to waste the better part of a spring on something the creek would simply ignore. Word got around by March. That was the nature of Caldwell County. Raymond had mentioned the project at the feed store in Marion while picking up a 50-pound bag of Purina flock razor and a set of replacement hydraulic seals. By the following Tuesday, 3 different men had relayed it to 3 different neighbors. Within 2 weeks, most of the farming community within 4 miles knew that Raymond Pruitt was planning to dig a creek channel by himself, using a tractor with a bad hydraulic line. The tone at the feed store was not hostile, just settled. Settled into the certainty that it wouldn't work. That he'd spend a spring digging and end up with a dry ditch and late plant. Raymond started digging on March 14, 1967, a Tuesday. Ground temperature had come up enough that the first 6 inches broke clean under the blade. He ran the 3-10 along the northeast fence line at 6:30 in the morning, blade angled to push east, and took the first pass of what would become the diversion channel. The hydraulic seal held. Mostly. He carried a rag in his shirt pocket and checked the line every 2 hours. It seeped, but didn't fail. The first 200 yards took 9 days. He worked from first light until the tractor needed fuel, ate lunch on the seat, and continued until the light went. His wife Helen brought coffee out to the field at 7 a.m. and again at 3 p.m. in a thermos she'd had since 1958. She didn't comment on the project, didn't ask how it was going, brought the coffee and walked back to the house. The soil was good for the first 18 inches, dark bottomland loam that the blade moved cleanly. Below that came a layer of reddish clay that resisted the angle. He adjusted the blade pitch and slowed his passes. He lost a full day to rain on March 22nd. Lost another on March 28th when the hydraulic seal finally gave up completely, and he had to drive the tractor into Marion and wait 4 hours at the John Deere dealer. The replacement seals cost $14. He was back digging by Thursday morning. He set grade stakes every 100 yards, string line between them, level checked with the carpenter's level. Slope calculated to fall 8 inches per 100 yards toward the southeast. Not enough slope to create erosive velocity, enough to move water steadily. He'd gotten that number from the TIVA manual. Minimum grade for stable channel flow on clay loam soil, 6 to 9 inches per 100 yards. He aimed for 8. By April 3rd, he had 400 yards cut. The channel ran straight and true across the Northfield boundary. Cecil Hargrove drove past on April 5th. Slowed the truck. Looked at the work from the road. Did not stop. Did not say anything. The headwall at Cutter's Run was the critical piece. Raymond built it from native limestone he'd pulled from the creek bed and the adjacent hillside over 2 winters of afternoon work, stacking it dry without mortar. The TIVA manual was specific about the construction angle. The diversion structure must be set oblique to the current flow, not perpendicular. Perpendicular placement allowed hydraulic pressure to undercut the foundation. Raymond had originally staked it square to the bank. After reading that section for the second time, he pulled the stakes and reset them at 22 degrees off square. The headwall was finished on April 14th, 31 days after he'd started. He installed the 2 culverts himself, with a come-along anchored to a fence post and a second fence post rigged as a cross-member. Wrestling 20 feet of 24-inch corrugated steel into position in a 3-foot-wide trench took longer than he had counted. 4 days for what a dozer operator with a crew could have done in an afternoon. He didn't have a dozer operator. He had a come-along in time. The stop-log gate was a simple wooden structure. 2 pieces of 6x6 oak set in slots cut into the headwall stone, removable by hand, controlling how much water, and Raymond had built similar structures for livestock crossings on small seasonal drainages. This was the same principle, larger. He opened the gate on May 1, 1967. He lifted the stop log with a steel rod. The water moved into the channel opening and spread across the gravel he'd laid in the channel bottom as protection against scouring. It ran thin at first, a sheet of water 6 inches wide, moving slowly over the stone. He walked alongside it as it advanced, watching the bank edges, looking for seeps or undercutting. The water reached the first culvert crossing in 22 minutes. Raymond stood at the culvert inlet and watched it enter, heard it moving through the steel pipe beneath the fence line. He walked to the outlet side. It came out clean. He continued south along the channel. The water reached the south terminus, 800 yards from the headwall, in 1 hour and 54 minutes. He stood at the end of the channel and looked back at what he'd dug. No one else was there. Helen was in the house. The neighbors were elsewhere. It was a Thursday morning, overcast, temperature in the low 50s, and the water moved where he had told it to move. He noted the time in the spiral-bound notebook, 9:47 a.m. He noted the flow rate, approximately 40 gallons per minute, estimated visually by timing how long it took to fill a 5-gallon bucket held in the channel. He wrote that down too. The spring planting was 3 weeks behind. He'd given that time to the digging. He planted corn in the 3rd week of May instead of the last week of April. The County Extension Bulletin projected a 12 to 18% yield reduction for late-planted corn in Caldwell County. Raymond read this in the bulletin and planted anyway. He spent the first 2 weeks of June cutting lateral branches with a flat spade, hand-dug side channels, running between crop rows from the main channel, directing water into the field. 40 hours of spade, work over 14 days. His hands blistered on the handle the first week. By the second week, the blisters had calloused over. He cut lateral branches across 54 of the 61 acres. The remaining 7, at the southern end where the grade finally worked against him, he watered with a cistern pump. 2 days a week. Manageable. The corn came in at 97 bushels per acre that season. The county average that year was 82. The summer had included a 46-day dry stretch between July 14th and August 29th. The worst consecutive dry period in Caldwell County since 1953, according to the Extension Office report issued in September. 4 neighboring farms filed for crop insurance payments. Raymond's corn, irrigated by gravity-fed creek water through a channel he dug with a leaking tractor in 31 days, came in 15 bushels above county average. He drove to the elevator in Marion, had the corn weighed, received his payment, and drove home. He noted the yield figure in the spiral-bound notebook with the brown paper bag map still folded into the back cover. Cecil Hargrove heard the number at the elevator. He ran into Raymond at the Marion hardware store in September, buying wire staples and a replacement packing for the cistern pump. Cecil didn't mention the yield directly, asked instead about the channel, how it was holding up after a season, whether there was silt accumulation. Raymond told him honestly, silt at the 2 bends and below each culvert. He'd cleared it twice, once in early June, once in mid-August, using the tractor blade for the main accumulations and a flat spade for the culvert sections. About 2 days of work total for the season. Cecil asked a few more questions. Practical questions. Equipment questions. The kind a man asks when he's working something out in his own mind. 2 other farmers from the county came out the following April to look at the channel. One of them, Earl Dunning, who farmed 80 acres 4 miles east on similarly drought-prone bottomland, walked the entire channel length with Raymond on a Sunday afternoon. He was quiet through most of it. Looked at the headwall construction for a long time, ran his hand along the limestone face, asked about the angle, why not square to the bank. Raymond explained the TIVA manual, the hydraulic pressure problem, the undercutting risk. Earl Dunning asked where he could get the manual. County Library. 3rd shelf from the top in the agriculture section. Earl Dunning dug his own channel the following year, 1968, Different creek on his property. Different grade. Different soil. He hired a dozer for 2 days at a cost of $340 and had 2 of his sons helping through the secondary work. He completed the diversion in 26 days. His corn yield in the summer of 1968 was 89 bushels per acre, 22 bushels above his previous 4-year average. Cecil Hargrove built his own channel in 1970, 3 years after watching Raymond do it. He didn't use a tractor blade. Hired the same dozer operator Earl had used. 1 week of work. 17 bushels per acre improvement in his first irrigated season. When people at the feed store asked him about it later, he said he'd done some research on gravity drainage. Didn't mention Raymond's name. Didn't need to. Everyone already knew where the idea had started. The channel on Raymond's property required the same maintenance year after year. Twice seasonal clearing, always the same 3 locations. The upper bend at the 200-yard mark, the lower bend at the 550-yard mark, and the section below the second culvert. Raymond cleared each one with a tractor blade in 2 hours and finished the detail work with the... He reseeded the bank edges each spring with fescue to hold the soil. He kept a strip of fence along both margins to keep the cattle out of the channel itself. He replaced 1 culvert in 1975 when corrosion compromised the lower seam. $34 for the replacement, purchased from the same Paducah supplier. He rebuilt the headwall's eastern face in 1973 after a high water event in February shifted 2 of the lower limestone courses. 3 days and no purchased materials, just resetting what had moved. He ran the channel from 1967 through 1984. 17 years. Corn yield on those 61 acres, averaged across all 17 seasons, 94 bushels per acre. The Caldwell County average over the same period was 79 across 61 acres, across 17 years. That 15 bushel per acre difference compounded into a figure Raymond never totaled in the notebook. He wasn't a man who added things up to admire them. He was a man who added things up to know what to do next. In 1979, the Princeton Extension Office published a bulletin on farm water management for West Kentucky bottomland operations. One of the case studies in the bulletin described a gravity-fed diversion channel in Caldwell County constructed by a single operator using on-farm equipment at a total project cost of $81, $67 for culverts, $14 for hydraulic seals. The bulletin did not name Raymond Pruitt. Called him a study participant. Noted that the project had operated successfully for 12 years at the time of publication, with no structural failure of the primary diversion structure. Raymond read the bulletin at his kitchen table on a February evening in 1979. Folded it and set it in the drawer with the notebook. He retired from active planting in 1983. His son Glenn leased the land to a neighboring corn operation and included the channel in the lease terms. The operator was responsible for the twice seasonal clearing and minor bank maintenance. The channel ran through the lease period without alteration. It ran through 1984, when the summer brought another extended dry stretch, and the neighboring farms without irrigation pulled reduced yields. The leased Pruitt acreage came in at 91 bushels per acre. Glenn sold the property in 1988 to a couple from Louisville who wanted to run a small cow-calf operation. They converted the function of the channel from crop irrigation to livestock water access, dug 3 access ramps through the bank at intervals, fenced the remainder. The water still moved. The headwall still stood. The limestone Raymond had stacked in 1967 without mortar, angled 22 degrees off perpendicular to the flow because the TIVA manual said it would last longer that way, was still holding. Raymond died in October of 1991. He was 72. He had kept the spiral-bound notebook current through his last year of active farming, 1982. 45 pages of entries, yield numbers, maintenance notes, weather observations, one entry from May 1, 1967 that read, channel opened, flow est, 40 gal min, time 9:47. Helen kept the notebook in the kitchen desk drawer after he died. She kept the photograph too. The one she'd taken on the morning the water first ran, black and white, 3x5 print. Raymond standing at the channel edge in his work boots with his hands in his pockets, looking at the water moving in the direction he'd told it to move. The Louisville couple sold the property in 1996. The new buyer, a row crop operator, tile, drained the fields and filled in the lateral branches Raymond had cut by hand in 1967. The main channel was left intact. Too much work to fill 800 yards of established ditch with good banks and a functioning stone headwall. The operator used it as a drainage buffer, letting field tile drain into it rather than using it for irrigation. Different purpose. Still the same channel. An aerial photograph taken in 2003 showed the main channel clearly, 800 yards of it, running southeast from the northeast corner of the property at a consistent grade. Following the line Raymond had staked with string and a borrowed carpenter's level across the spring of 1967. The headwall was visible as a dark line at the creek bank. The grade he'd calculated on a brown paper bag in October of 1966 had held through 4 owners, 17 years of active irrigation, 7 years of livestock use, and another decade of drain tile management. Still holding. The spiral-bound notebook stayed in Helen's kitchen drawer until she moved in with her daughter in Hopkinsville in 1998. What happened to it after that? No one who knew Raymond could say for certain. The channel was still there.